My name is Wendell Trent. I served in the Navy from 1943 to 1946. I'm 92 years old now. My story starts in late April 1943. I graduated from high school. I was 17. Since my birthday was coming up pretty soon, I went to my summer job and out at Westlake Beach, and then I waited for it was for my birthday. It was a federal law then that all boys at the age of 18 would register for the draft. You see, the United States was fighting two wars at that time, one with Hitler in Europe and one with the Japs in the Pacific. You see, since we were in high school when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor, it was common knowledge that everyone is going to have to serve. And we felt strongly that we need to participate. And I had an older brother that already was in the Navy. And we didn't fight it. We didn't, it was a little bit different than they are today. You see, the day I left to go to service, I walked down Shiloh Road, which was a gravel road, down to 36 by myself. I caught the Danville bus by myself. I went to Danville by myself and got at the office there and waited for the bus. And then they put us on a bus and took us to Indianapolis. Not a family member or nothing. In all the 3 years in service, I never made one phone call. So you guys today, you have your cell phones and you talk to your family many times during the day. My kids do that, I know. And so it's a different life then for us, you know. And being kind of in those years, I was a country boy. Avon's growing now, but so I'd only been out of Indiana one time as a 5-year-old. And so it was, you know, kind of a lot of new things in your life, new experiences, and everything about it was new.
Probably had to grow up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's right. Anyhow, I went to the Navy, and I went to Great Lakes, and then there I went up through boot camp, and on completion of boot camp, or right before, I chose to go into the Hospital Corps School there at Great Lakes. So after boot camp, I think we had a 30-day leave, and then went back, went to Hospital Corps School, and graduated from that Hospital Corps School in December, I believe, and then we waited around till the new year and on KP duty and just killing time. And then they sent us to Bethesda, Maryland, to the National Naval Medical Hospital there. It's a real large hospital, about 9 miles out of D.C., and there to work in the hospital. While there, I saw President Roosevelt at a distance. He went down an aisle in his wheelchair, and he came there for treatments.
That's incredible. That's
Pardon?
pretty incredible.
Yeah. And anyhow, my first ward there was a double ENT, eyes, ears, nose, and throat ward. There were 2 of us corpsmen, and we were called corpsmen then. 2 of us corpsmen that served in that ward. We had 7 to 7 work hours, and we had 2 shifts, day or night. So we drew a day shift, and so we worked the ward, and we tended to patients, all Navy and Marine wounded boys from the war, and with all kinds of problems. And we gave them medication, gave them baths, we changed their beds. We worked under a nurse who was an officer. And so I worked that ward for maybe 2 to 3 months, and then I was transferred to a plastic surgery ward. And I found that to be interesting. Back then, it was such a slow process from starting to get a boy repaired, I would say, until he was completed. And and then that was a night shift. That was from 7 at night till 7 in the morning, and that's long hours. Mm-hmm. We kept records of everything that we did. And then at the end of like a couple more months or so, we got word that we were shipping out, and we were going to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. And we said, what in the world are we going to a Marine base for? So we learned that the Marine Corps does not have a medical corps. Oh. The Navy furnishes all the medical corps for the Marine Corps. And in fact, they say that the Marine Corps is just a corps of the Navy. Okay, it's a fighting corps. Anyhow, we arrived at Camp Lejeune, and we sent all of our Navy clothes home, got complete Marine issue, and there we were to be trained completely like the Marines were, and we were. And we didn't have any medical classes or anything like that at all. It was all Marine stuff. We learned to fire every weapon that the Marines did. We did all the hikes that they did. We went under live wire, barbed wire, crawled underneath that, and we did everything that the Marines did in the training. What they were trying to do, they were trying to quickly, they were expediting everything. They needed the boys in combat quick. And they fed us real well. So they wanted to fatten us up, strengthen us up, and get us in real good shape as quick as they could. Then we got word that we're shipping out again. We boarded a train, took 7 days across the states to California, stayed there overnight, went aboard a ship, 7 days to Hawaii. We pulled into Pearl Harbor, unloaded there, and we were in Tent City there for a period of a couple of weeks, and then we got word that we were being taken over to Maui. So we went by ship over to Maui, and that's where the 4th Marine Division's home base was, up in the mountains on Maui. The 4th Marine Division had just come back from the Saipan-Tinian operation down the Marianas. And they were needing replacements. They had had quite a few boys that were wounded or killed on Saipan-Tinian. So I was assigned to the 4th Medical Battalion at that time. That's nothing but corpsmen of all ranks. So we began to go into training with them. At that time, we still stayed in the group of the medical battalion, and our training then was planning on setting up field hospitals, how to evacuate boys, that type of thing. Then in late 44, we began to learn that we're going to be shipping out. And I don't recall right now what the date was that we left. They did give us liberty over at Oahu for 3 days, I think. And then we shipped out and in early February and of 45, and we headed northwest, excuse me. And so after a couple of days or so, we pulled up anchor at Guam, and they informed us that we would be able to send our last letter home now at that time. They were keeping everything secret as to where we were going, but they knew that it wasn't going to be a honeymoon. So we sent our last letter home. They took it into Guam and mailed it, and then we left Guam. Immediately after we left Guam, why the word was official, passed out with maps and everything as to where we were going. We were going to Iwo Jima. And there were groups around, there were platoons circled around maps on the deck, here, there, just every place, and they all were serious about pointing out points of interest and where their outfit would fit, where it would land, and what they would do, and all this type of thing all the time. So the atmosphere changed just 100%, you know. It's serious business, you know. The horseplay is over with. Now we get down to business. And so we, on February the 18th, or well, I'll say on the way up from Guam up to Iwo, we increasingly picked up ships. We'd pick up more all the time. And would you know, around Iwo there were reported 484 ships of all sizes. That's a large armada. There were every size: aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, the whole works. During the night, we pulled up anchor off of Iwo. There wasn't much activity at that time, and as it become daylight, you looked around and saw all those ships, and you could not believe this must be serious stuff. I will tell you that when they first talked about us going to Iwo, that they projected we would take it from 3 to 5 days, and then we were to go on up and help at Okinawa. That was the next operation and the last one, if you'll remember. Well, when about 7 o'clock in the morning, why, the ships all opened fire. I mean, they just really fired on that island. I'll tell you that Iwo had been bombed for 72 days by the Air Force as they came up from the Marianas up, and when they were bombing Tokyo, well, they went right over Iwo and they bombed it. And we learned that they did no damage at all. We didn't know, but we learned that they were all underground, that they had dug caves and tunnels and everything, so there were no Japs above ground. They had potholes and stuff where they could shoot out of, and that was it. And there was some small entrances to caves, concrete, hospital underground, everything underground. Well, the ships fired then on Iwo for up to about 8 o'clock. And then the planes from the carriers, I think there were 4 carriers there, and there were both Navy planes and Army planes. And they dive bombed that place and dropped everything they had. Well, the first wave was scheduled to go in at 9 o'clock. And so at 9, they stopped firing the planes. So they want to kill their own people, so, you know, they have timing on these things. So they stopped both the ships and the aircraft, and the first wave went in and landed. The Japs had terraced 2 or 3 steps, and I'll say about 6, 7 feet high of stair steps out of that soft volcanic ash, and vehicles could not penetrate it at all. It just sunk down. And also it made a target for our boys as we went up over the high step of it, that the Japs were zeroed in on those spots, and they were vulnerable. But the first wave was not fired upon. They just went in and piece of cake. Second wave come in, likewise, they were not fired upon. Third wave came in, and the Jap general had planned this. He waited until the third wave got in. They had all those boys in there not protecting themselves or nothing. Then they opened fire on all of them when they had them all congregated, and we really suffered a lot of casualties right there. I was in the fifth wave, and I went in the Higgins boat with, I think, the 35 corpsmen, okay? Half of them were designated to set up the field hospital and evacuation station. The boys that had seniority, that had been in with the 4th on the Saipan and Tinian operation, they kind of got priority. So they got to go with those that were putting up the field hospital. The other half of us, we were under Scotty. Scotty was a pharmacist mate first class. And our assignment was to evacuate wounded boys. And Scotty was issued a phone. You can imagine what kind of phones they had in those days. And they rolled out coils of wire for 4 phones. And they were running it, and those that they would be blowing up, and they'd have to roll out another one, you know. They didn't last very long. But anyhow, Scotty started getting phone calls all the time. Groups up there, platoons were needing corpsmen to evacuate wounded. The early going was really tough, and it was a learning process. One of the 2 famous words we learned were keep down. And we learned that even though the plane that had bombed for 72 days didn't kill a Jap, they made protection for us. They made those big shell craters where they bombed, and we stayed in those holes for protection. And we learned to go from one to another like a rat. Anyhow, I remember the first day on the landing craft, which has a ramp in front, we were in. As we approached the beach and our ramp went down, here come a Marine running down the edge of the beach, yelling his head off, "I want to go back on your boat." And he was hollering for the boatswain to wait for him. He was missing an arm. And don't think that didn't put us up to about right there. And so I said, "Wendell, what have you got yourself into, you know?" So anyhow, we dug in, and Scotty would tell us what to do then, and answer some phone calls. We took care of several boys that came out on their own that were wounded. They weren't very far up because the front lines wasn't very far. Anyhow, as it got to be dark, well, it seemed like the warfare kind of subsided, and Scotty says, we need to dig in tonight. And he said, Trent, you go up there to the left flank up there, up toward the corner of the airstrip. And so I went up there and I started digging in. So as you can imagine how much gear we had. When we landed, we had a backpack, we had a bedroll wrapped around it. I had a medical unit. I had a 45, I was issued a 45. Had the canteen, gas mask, just loaded down. So you get in your hole and you start shedding stuff because you want to be lightweight as possible.
Yeah.
So anyhow, I had just kind of enlarged the hole of it I had found, and here comes Smitty, and he says, Wendell, Scotty told me to bunk with you up here. I said, good. So we used the buddy system. We were trained that way, you know, that cover each other's back, you know. And one take a nap while another guy stays awake if you can sleep. I don't remember sleeping. Anyhow, what we were afraid of is previously down Saipan, Tinian, those Guadalcanal and those places down there, the Japs had done banzai attack at night. They'd come out in groups at night and call them banzai attacks. And so we figured they'd try that there. And so we really couldn't allow ourselves to go to sleep. We just sat and your eyes just froze open, you know. And anyhow, we got through the night somehow. And the next day, Scotty got, I don't know, well, they had a procedure every morning. The ships would be bombarded again, and then they'd stop, and then the planes would come in and do their thing, and then about 9 o'clock, the troops took off, and then that's when there were casualties, and Scotty get a phone call, you know, here, there, and yon, and all. So, long about middle of the day, Scotty says, guys, I need 2 volunteers, and that's not standard procedure. You just in the Marine Corps you tell, yeah. You don't ask, okay. But Scotty was a gentleman, and he had a reason for that. And he said they got some casualties up here, quite a few of them. What they tell me, and one boy's pretty bad. So I just made eye contact with Smitty, my buddy, and we got a nod, and then we said, we'll go. So Smitty and I, we got directions about where we're going, and we took off. Hole after hole and crawling, and you got rid of most of your extra gear. We found a place, and they had a lot of casualties. They got some of them out. They lost some. I think they had a new lieutenant. They didn't have a corpsman. Okay, this one boy was pretty bad. We gave him morphine, bandaged him, and we had a stretcher, and so we put him on the stretcher, and 2 Marines volunteered to help us, and so Smitty and I were on the back end of it, and these 2 Marines were on the front end. And as we started up out of the hole, the Marine ahead of me up here got hit. So we pulled back, and I forget his total damage. I don't know whether he lived or not. And so I told Smitty, I said, we've got to wait till dark now. We can't get out of here because that sniper has got us pinpointed. So they said, okay. But the boy, the casualty, he kept talking about his mother. He wanted to get out, he wanted to get home. and on and on and on. And we said, well, we got to wait until it's dark so we can get out. So, now like I say, I don't recall how we handled the Marine who got shot. I don't know whether somebody else helped him or something, but it's vague in my mind. I had this other boy on my mind. Anyhow, we worked and kind of dug a little bit of a ditch out through there while we were waiting, just so that we wouldn't be up very high when we went out. About dark, we got out, we got back, we got the boy back to the evacuation center, and then they would temporarily take care of them sometimes, or leave them like they are, and take them on a stretcher down to the beach to be evacuated. That was the second day, and then the third day, seemed like mid-morning, a runner came back to Scotty and says, we need a corpsman. Our corpsman got killed. Scotty says, Trent, get your gear and go with this boy and stay with that outfit for the duration. Okay. So I gathered up all my stuff and I went back with that runner, and I joined 2nd Battalion, 25th, and didn't know one person, never knew one name. Still this day, I never knew one name, but the acting lieutenant, and I think he was a replacement, said, Doc, and then they call you Doc, Dan. We're Doc in combat. Doc, you can bunk there with Corporal so-and-so, okay? So I was there with him, and we had various things going on. They were trying to work with the adjoining platoons to advance and stuff like that. And the lieutenant come to me and he says, Doc, we've got a runner down out there, and you need to go out and see if you can get him. If he's alive, why, see if you can bring him back. If he's not, if he's dead, why, there's a manila envelope in his shirt. Bring that back. And there were some other comments about a weapon. He had a pistol that somebody kind of wanted a souvenir or something like that. Pearl handled. Okay. And I think it was an officer that asked that. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, said okay. So I slid over into a shell hole, and I said, you've got to get yourself down as lightweight as you possibly can. So I got rid of everything except my medical unit, my 45. And I practiced getting my 45 holster unsnapped many times. I want my hand to know automatically how to do it. So I took off, and I knew that I couldn't dare show myself because this boy had taken the sniper. And so I just went like a rat or a snake. I just dove from hole to hole, crawled, jumped, and I finally found him, and he was alive. And he said, boy, I'm glad to see you. And I said, yeah. So I checked him out, and he had a bad wound in his upper thigh. I gave him a shot of morphine. I bandaged him up real tight so he wouldn't bleed any more than what he had, and so that I didn't, in my rough handling of him, I didn't activate some problems. And so I taped both his feet together, and I told him that there's only one way that I can get you out. He weighed more than I did. I was 145 and not very big. And so I said, the only way I can get you out is to crawl with you on my back. And I was out 50 to 75 yards out. He said, okay, you know, he was willing. And so I rolled over, pulled him on me, on my back, and I started off, you know, elbows and knees. And it seemed like it took forever. And I would crawl into the holes and rest. And I did that, seemed like all day. But anyhow, I finally got back pretty close to where the platoon was, and the lieutenant and another Marine with a stretcher come running out to us, and dove into a hole and loaded that boy on the stretcher, and they took off. Well, to this day, I don't know that boy's name. I didn't know that lieutenant's name. I didn't know anything else. So anyhow, they took him off, and then I went into the big shell hole where I'd left my gear. And I just got in there and sat down and took a breather. I just rested for a few minutes, and a Marine kind of slid in with me. He introduced himself as a war correspondent. I used to know his name. I have it written someplace. And he said, Doc, if you don't mind, I'd like to interview you. I said, okay, just like you are. And he asked me my name and all that information, and my folks' name, where they lived, Plainfield, what newspapers do they take, Times and the Friday Caller. You know, I was so stretched out. I was fatigued to no end. I felt like I accomplished something that I didn't think I was going to be able to do. I thought I was going to get both of us in trouble. And so those were the things that went through my mind. So, but he says, well, he told me early on, he says, I just witnessed what you did. That's why I'm asking you these questions. And so he asked what radio station the folks listened to, and all that in the Indianapolis paper. And anyhow, I think then he just went on his way. So the couple of weeks, maybe it wasn't that long, the folks got a telegram, and Dad worked nights, and Mom and the rest of the family were home, and they wouldn't open the telegram because they knew where I was, and they were sure what it was saying. And so after many hours during that day, my oldest brother, who was still home, I think he was about a senior in high school, he said, Mom, I'll open it. So he opened it, and it was good news instead of bad news. Okay. And I learned that the radio station in Indianapolis, every evening they played a skit enacting some activity from Indiana boys in service and things. So they put my story on the radio, and they acted it out in like the telegram and everything said. I've often wondered if it's in the library someplace, if I could get my hands on that, I'd love to have it. I have a lot of wishes in my life. I wish I knew some boys' names that I helped, and then I think the second thing, now that's what I'm trained to do. You know, that's what I'm supposed to do, and that's just my job. But I still would have liked to have been able to call them up when we're 60 years old and say, hey, how you making it, you know, and stuff like that. Anyhow, that didn't happen. But okay, I'm going to go on then. On the 5th day of of the battle, why they raised the flag on Mount Suribachi, which everyone's seen a million times. I have it right over there, and that one there is the one that's taken in D.C. I've seen that about 5 times, and I was about a mile and a half north, and a Jeep radio picked it up that said, and it blasted out, hey, look up there on Suribachi, they're raising a flag. So we could look up there and we can see the little bitty activities up there is about all it was, you know, from where we were. And so it didn't mean anything too big to us right then. We had serious things on our mind, you know. Later on, it has blossomed and grown, you know. The battle on Iwo then, it subsided some after the first few days when everything was really in a mess. They solved the problem of the vehicles getting on by the Air Force flew in some metal nettings that they laid down and made a path so they could drive over that, and they got tanks and jeeps and medical trucks and all that kind of stuff in. CBs were part of that. Then they kept advancing, and the 4th Division had landed on the right, the 5th Division on the left, and they cut off the small part of the island and took the Suribachi in that area. The 4th kind of turned right, and then about the 3rd or 4th day, the 3rd Marine Division, which was out there and waiting, landed and came up through the middle, and so we had 70,000 troops on Iwo. There were 22,000 Japs, and anyhow, as we progressed in, as we got the 3rd in the middle of us, well, we made pretty good time, and yet we didn't go very fast because it was just trying to get them out from those caves and tunnels and stuff. Finally, when things, well, I can say that on all of the 36 days I was on there, never changed my clothes once. Shoes stayed on all the time. 8K rations all the time out of my pack. Then when it was secured, why the lieutenant told me I could go back to my medical unit. So I left my outfit that I was with, that's 2nd Battalion, 25th, and went back to the 4th Marine Division medical unit. And I went back there, and that was in the area where the field hospital was, and we were all concerned about who wasn't there. So we learned that Big Nick didn't make it, Greek Vargas didn't make it, Andy Anderson didn't make it, and so they said we could go up to the cemeteries. They'd started the cemeteries then. They had 3 of them, 1 for each division. So a friend of mine and I went up there and walked the cemetery and looked it over and looking for names of our friends and guys that we knew. Then the next day we left. We took an LST out to a troop ship and went aboard a troop ship. And the nicest thing happened. A sailor came up to me and he says, I'm going to look after you now. He says, I'm going to take care of you. Come on with me, and we're going to get clean clothes. We're going to take a shower, and phew, sounds good. So we did. I got a shower and I got clean clothes, and went down, had a good meal, and then got back to went back to Maui, and I know when we unloaded there, the capital of Maui is Wailuku, and the women and the children had lined the streets with flags. Of course, the men were all gone; they were all in service, but children and women were lined the streets for the 4th Marine Division to go back up to their camp. I remember that well. Then when I got back to camp, why we touched base with everybody to find out who's what and where, and how many guys are missing in our group, one thing and another. And we weren't doing anything, no assignments or anything. We were just kind of recouping, you might say. There were a group of us sitting around talking, and there were some older fellows in the group. And I know I said, we were talking about, we knew where we were going next. We were going to we were going to Japan. We were going to make a landing on Japan proper. And that was our next training project. And I said, boy, there's got to be some other way of doing this besides being a corpsman with a rifle platoon. So one older guy spoke up, and he says, you might consider being an operating room technician. And I said, what's that amount to? And so he told me somewhat. He said, you will be working in a hospital or in a sick bay or something like that, and it's a lot better than out in the front lines with the Marines. And so I said, how do I get enrolled? And he said, well, I'll speak to my doctor about it. So he did, and I was accepted. And so I went down, then transferred down to Makawa, where there was a small Army hospital that was run by the Navy during that period of time, and so I started working every day, going to the operating room. They'd schedule their surgeries about 10 o'clock in the morning, and at first you just go down and stand and watch, and you learn sterile technique and everything, and then learn to get acclimated to it. And anyhow, I went through all those steps, and then you first start helping out as a scrub nurse in dirty surgery, and so I was working that. Then I advanced on up to be assigned for standby on weekends in case accidents and things come in. And there was 2 that I remember. There was one that the guy was cleaning the bayonet and running through his hand, and doctor liked it, never got the tendons caught back together again. The other event, there was a Marine that got out, got drunk and had a wreck. Well, as you know, today when they prepare you for surgery, you don't eat. You get your stomach and everything all cleaned out. Well, when they have accidents when they're drunk, they're just opposite. They're full of everything. They're a mess. So that was something I didn't forget. He couldn't keep anything down. So anyhow, then I kind of worked at that for a while, and all of a sudden we got a new order. The heads up at the base back at camp were filling in all the slots that were made by casualties for Iwo, and they were filling them in. And so they found out they needed all the corpsmen they could muster, so they called all of us guys that was working down there at that hospital back to base, and they sent me to the 2nd Battalion, 24th Marines. there, my lieutenant was Ed Cavallini. And it turned out in my life to be a real good story. We worked, and we were going to make a landing on Japan, and that was coming up pretty soon. President Roosevelt died. Truman took over as president. Truman's a little tougher than what Roosevelt was. He was bulldog type personality, and he told them to get those atomic bombs ready and let's go. So we were out on bivouac one day, and we were out there for a week. I was with Ed Cavallini's platoon, and about the middle of the week, one of the supply truck went into camp to pick up stuff and bring it back, and Bernie Levine, he was a corpsman, he went in, I don't know why, but he come running back, and when he got out, he said, "Guys, I got news for you." Says, "United States just dropped an A bomb on Japan, and the war's going to be over pretty soon." He didn't say atomic bomb, or they just knew it as an A bomb. And so he didn't know they were going to drop the second one, even at that time. It was a few days later, they dropped the second one. And then the war was over. Well, the government had all of this expense of paying all these soldiers in service, and so they had to devise a system real quick to get these boys back home and get them off of their payroll and making it for themselves. So they devised a point system, and with so many points for this, so many points for that, so and you get discharged accordingly. Okay. I had about 3 months to go, and so they sent me stateside. If some had more time than that, like Cavallini and Jim, they had to go up to Okinawa and do police duty up there for a while. I came stateside, and I took a 30-day leave, which they gave me. At the end of 30 days, I was sent back to Frisco, 515 Market Street, and to a train pool. A train pool took dischargees to distribution centers, like the Great Lakes or many other places. And so I was on independent medical duty there. I had a medical unit in a train, and up in a corner compartment, put up sick bay sign, and didn't have to do anything. We had 200 or 300 boys on each draft to take home. First trip, I went to New Orleans. Second trip, I went to Memphis. Third trip, I went to Great Lakes. The officer in charge of our group, when we went to Great Lakes, says, "Guys, any of you guys want to go on a special trip of your choice? Let me know, because I just got assigned to the front office permanently, so out in Frisco." So I said, "Yeah, I'd like to go to Great Lakes every time, because I could get 3 days off at each end, and I'd come home to Indiana." Well, I started dating my girlfriend then. And that was a pretty big time to get on a train in Chicago and come down to Indianapolis and hop a bus out to Plainfield, and then go back. Anyhow, I made 18 trips before I got discharged. And I got discharged April the 6th in '46. On about might have been the 5th or 6th day, the Japs fired a white phosphorus shell over us. White phosphorus is like an acid, and it burns, and it's anti-personnel type thing, and so we took quite a bit of it. I had a big container of sulfa salve and sulfa was strong back then. Penicillin wasn't even available yet. And I rubbed that sulfa salve, which cuts off the air to it, and that took care of us, so to speak. So when I went down to get treatment and get more salve for the other guys, why, I was written up for the Purple Heart. On the second day when Smitty and I went to get the boy, and we had to wait till dark to bring him out. Well, Scotty wrote us up for Silver Star, and they gave us the Bronze Star medal. That's a World War II medal. I got that at Camp Lejeune recently. I've been to the 4th Marine Division reunions, about 4 or 5 times, and we had a final muster 2 years ago now, and when we decided we wouldn't have any more reunions, and so we had a final muster down at Camp Lejeune, and they gave us those. It's nice to be recognized. You know, I can say that there were 70,000 of us. of just one of 70,000. So we never talked about it. You know, everybody was doing their best and doing what they could. We didn't talk about it. I never talked about it till Desert Storms. I never told my wife or anybody anything about my experiences. And then I stayed up all night and watched that. And then the next day I said, you know, I think I need to tell you and the kids my military history. And she said, great. So she said, we're going to start recording. So we went to the library and got all that they had, and which they had my telegram stuff in there. And they had more than what I realized. And I just think I'm one of millions, you know. I'm not nothing special. But I did what a 19 to 20-year-old boy had to do, and I was glad that I stayed in good physical condition. I basically kept myself mentally on track and didn't make any boners, and I'm very fortunate, very fortunate.